Welcome back to another episode of the Sky Society podcast. Today I'll be chatting with Lori Potts. Let me restart that. I have your intro here, okay. Welcome back to another episode of the Sky Society podcast. Today I'm chatting with Lori Potts. Lori advises women on advancing their careers using science-backed communication principles, enabling them to overcome internal and external biases that are holding them back, which is an absolute perfect guest for the Sky Society podcast. So thank you, Lori, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to share today.
Of course. I'm excited to go through your journey, and Lori now does, one-on-one coaching and corporate coaching, but how she got here is really interesting. So before we go ahead and dive into all of that, can you tell me a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I worked in marketing and organizational development and tech for years. I also did some corporate training internally. And as you know, doing marketing, I was either bored out of my mind or overworked. And I always knew I wanted to do coaching, but I was experiencing a lot of imposter syndrome and also, being told, over and over that you have to be a certain age or you have to have a certain number of experience or a certain number of years of experience to be a coach, or you have to be certified, or all of these things that the world tells women, like you have to have 100% of the qualifications to apply for a job. And I just decided, I got let go in 2020, and I just decided, like, I am done trying to work in marketing. Like, this isn't my passion. This isn't what I wanted to do. And during my undergrad, I did some organizational development. And one of the managers that I had asked me to help him with some leadership coaching because he noticed that I was able to recognize the gap between his intent and impact very easily, because I would provide him feedback. And I just noticed when in our one-on-ones, and he was very open to feedback. So I helped him with that. And it just always felt so natural to me. I've always been able to easily recognize the gap between intent and impact. So I decided to just go into coaching after I was done with marketing. And
Lori, I want you to explain that really quickly.
Sure.
Impact, or I even said it wrong, but can you touch on that more, please?
Yes. So gap between intent and impact. We don't always make the impact we intend because of other people's experiences in their own life and how they're perceiving us, and how we have grown up and been taught to act in certain ways. So, for example, my mom frequently told me, smile, you'll look pretty, because I wasn't one of those kids that was just smiley all the time. And I learned that smiling is actually a subordinate trait. So I was actually killing my credibility in corporate America by smiling all the time from what my mother had taught me growing up. And that's a perfect example of the gap between intent and impact. I was trying to build my credibility. I was trying to be perceived as a leader, but something that I was taught as a child that's very much based in sexism and bias was holding me back. So once I left marketing, I decided to focus on doing a lot of research about how to present myself as credible and help other women do the same thing. And that's just one example of gap between intent and impact. And a really important way to establish your gap between intent and impact is getting feedback. And sometimes that's hard, especially if you're insecure, but going into a situation where you may feel insecure for a few moments, or, have a few days where, you're trying to cope with this difficult feedback, is worth it in the long run, because you're going to be able to improve. So if you can get feedback maybe from a work friend, but it needs to be someone, if you're trying to improve in corporate, if you're trying to improve in your career, it has to be someone who perceives you while you're working. So it can be your manager, it can be a work friend, someone who will be able to recognize what you're trying to do, and where you're actually at. And so you can ask, like, how am I perceived? A very open-ended question. And, don't do a leading question. Just ask a very open-ended question. And hopefully you should be asking someone who's will be honest with you, like, and
That's
tell
a
them, I
scary
want you to be
question.
honest.
That's a
It
scary
can
question
be,
to ask, though.
it can be. And sometimes that it will be things that you don't always expect. And some of it might be based in sexism. Some of it, might be things that women hear all the time in corporate, like, you don't speak up enough in meetings. Whereas if, a woman's too quiet, then they'll hear that. But if they are too outspoken, then they'll say, you're a little bit too aggressive and other people don't get a chance to speak in meetings. So you might hear those things, but it's still helpful to know how you're being
Yeah.
perceived. So if you can do that, then you're going to better be able to get where you want to go, because you're going to know how you're perceived. And different people from different backgrounds are going to perceive you differently. So it's helpful to get it from a variety of perspectives. Because the way my father perceives me, the way my siblings perceive me, because I was the youngest child, they never really saw me as credible until I said, yeah, I had a contract with Facebook last year. They're like, oh, you're actually a serious business professional. Like, yes, of course I am. But they've always seen me as their little sister.
Hmm.
So understanding that other people's backgrounds will cause them to see you differently makes a difference as well. But there are things that you can do generally to help you overcome the biases that people generally will have towards you as a woman or as someone who's younger in business. And there are things that people can do who, are male or are they can have all sorts of different backgrounds. But there are things that you can do based in bias or, help you work against bias that will help you advance. I could share some
So
of those if you feel like that's where we should go with this.
let me pause you for a sec. So just
Sure.
to clarify that I'm understanding you correctly. So you realize that you have this talent for identifying the gap between intent and impact of what someone is trying to do versus what they're actually doing or coming across as. And you're saying that as women, it's important for us to understand how we are perceived, because we could be having this intent of moving up and succeeding in our career, but our impact may not be actually doing that based off of what other people's perceptions of us are.
Exactly. How we perceive ourselves is different how others perceive us.
And
So
are
we have to make
you,
changes.
and if I were to, are you familiar with the likability trap at all?
Oh, yes. There's that gap between, like, you have to be just warm enough with, like,
Yeah.
for women, you have to be just warm enough and you have to be just expressing enough competence to be likable. It's like this two-edged sword. It's so hard.
Yes, yes. So that one that you're talking about is called the Goldilocks conundrum, and the whole concept behind the likability trap. It's a really great book if anyone wants to pick it up. Is essentially that as women we have to do things to succeed that make us inherently unlikable, and so we're in this paradox. So we have to choose. Pretty much feel like we have to choose between either being likable or being successful, and that is the likability trap. My question to you and challenge is do we change ourselves in order to do we change or are you advising women to change aspects about themselves in order to better be perceived by others, or what is the importance of being authentically yourself and doing things because that's who you are versus like adjusting in order to increase or improve someone's perception of you?
That is a great question. I will never try to get someone to change who they are at their core. One of the first questions that I ask clients is, what are your values? That's what we get to first before we start making any changes. And that's important because we don't want someone to have to be a different person than they are to succeed. If you are, excuse me, if you want to be a leader, then you're probably already going to be acting in certain ways to be a leader. If there are gaps between that, then we'll adjust your communication in some ways. But if we ever are going past the boundary of I feel like this isn't who I am anymore, then we're going to change. We're going to change that. So there are a few things like, you know, backing up from your screen if you're working remotely so people can see your hands when you talk. That's something very simple that you can do that usually isn't going to change who you are. But showing your hands when you talk and using a variety of hand movements is proven to increase people's view of your likability and people wanting to pay attention to you. So just, and in addition, it helps people trust you because our brains are always asking this question of, do I feel safe? And so if people can see your hands, then this bias from centuries and centuries of conditioning of us asking, does someone have a rock or a spear in their hands? If they're trying to hurt me, if someone can see your hands, then they feel that they're more safe with you. So that's something really simple that we can do to help people feel that they can trust us more. And it's based in bias, but it's something simple that you're probably already using your hands when you talk. Most people do a little bit. And so if you back up from your camera, so you're, about 4 feet away from the camera, so then people feel natural, like you're having a conversation with them, because typically conversations in America occur between 4 and 7 feet away from people, unless you're in a more intimate relationship. So if you can be about 4 to 7 feet away from your camera, then it'll feel more natural. So those are some simple things that you can do to increase trust and increase likability, but it doesn't necessarily change who you are. So there are like simple things based in science like that women can do and anyone can do. I coach men sometimes as well that can help you advance. So simple things like that. I won't ask people to just change everything about who they are. I'm working with someone who may be a potential client in the future, and she's very vulnerable. She posts things that I wouldn't be comfortable sharing on LinkedIn, but it's so inspirational. I am not going to tell her like, you need to be like calm down on the vulnerability. So that makes some people feel uncomfortable. That's who she is, and I'm not going like that's a big important value for her. So I wouldn't tell her stop doing this. We work with that and make that part of her strength because that's already one of her strengths. Does that answer the question well enough?
Yes, yeah. So I think you answered in the sense of that it's not changing like who you are as a person, but maybe just being more mindful of the small things that you're doing that can
Exactly.
compound and potentially hinder your pursuit of whatever your career goal may be.
Exactly. A couple other things, like I said, smiling. Like if that's just who you are, like you smile and that's fine. But if you're doing it just to appease people, like be more conscious of that because I noticed that like I'll notice sometimes like that person expressed some anger and then you started smiling to try and appease them. You don't need to do that. If they are experiencing emotion, then fine, be conscious of that and manage the conflict, but it doesn't mean you need to smile because there's other ways to build your credibility and build your likability. And one of those things, instead of smiling to show engagement, is tilting your head. It shows engagement in the conversation without communicating subordination. And nodding your head when you're talking to communicate, I agree with myself, rather than constantly nodding your head when they're talking to communicate you agree with them. It's another way. And those are just simple things that you can change throughout your everyday communication that will increase your credibility and help people view you more as a leader.
I love those. Those are some great pieces of advice. So we're stepping back from the camera. We are being mindful of if we are smiling because we are someone who likes to smile, if we're smiling to make someone feel more comfortable. And then in order to show intent or show that you're listening, to do a little tilt of your head to the side instead of consistently nodding it up and down. I think those are three amazing pieces of advice. I want to go a little bit more into this gender bias because I know you've done extensive research on gender bias. But before we go into that, I feel like had a similar, I don't know if exposure of the word to experiencing gender bias of where you didn't originally buy into this idea that women have it harder than men do because of the culture you grew up in. But when you entered the corporate world, you discovered that it actually was inequitable and unequal. So tell me a little bit about how you came to that realization.
Yes. So I grew up in a very conservative household, and had a father who was very chauvinistic. Um, and my mother did what I mentioned, the smiling thing to appease my father. And so I learned those same things, to, shrink myself to appease people, literally my body, shrink myself to appease people, but also psychologically, like stop talking. My father was a chronic interrupter. So, like though once I went into corporate America, I'm like, these things are triggering me. Like, what's going on? Or like, why did I just smile right then? I didn't want to. So when I graduated and went into marketing, um, I noticed like I would make a mistake and people would be like, that's not okay. Like, reprimand me. And a man would make a mistake. I'd be like, oh yeah, that happens sometimes. And they get the benefit of the doubt. So I just noticed these patterns, and men making fun of previous women who had worked in the organization, and what they were making fun of was their mannerisms. Nothing to do with their qualifications, certifications, degrees, experience, all mannerisms. So just observing those things, and I'd also been in therapy for years, so I'd learned, a lot of the toxic and abusive experiences that I had as a child, framed how I act now. And so a combination of those two things, um, helped me realize that there are a lot of things holding me back, not just from my experiences and how, I act myself with my internal bias, but how other men were perceiving me, because I I was so frequently around surrounded by just men. I was one of those only women in the room frequently. And so it was a combination of things that helped me realize that it was a problem. But yeah, because I grew up in such a conservative environment, I was like, you know, me too. I don't think that's really a problem. Like, why is this such a big deal? Or like Sheryl Sandberg's book Lean In, like why, like, yeah, I'm very career oriented. Why is it important to not leave before you leave? Which means like if you're having a baby, getting married, other priorities in your life, don't, step back from your career and not put as much effort in just because other life changes are happening. Um, but so often when things got pushed back on me, or when people constantly interrupted me in meetings, I realized this isn't this isn't because necessarily of me. It's because other people perceive me as less credible because I'm a woman. Because I know, and for example, I'd say something in a meeting and then a man would say it and people laughed at it because it was funny. Because when a man makes a joke, then it's funnier than when a woman makes a joke. It's just one of those things with bias. Or I would present an idea and then a man would say it differently and he got the credit. So just
Yeah.
noticing those patterns over and over, it just made me so angry. And
Yeah.
I learned that like anger isn't bad, it's motivation. Excuse me.
Lean In
So
does
I used that
a
motivation to do a lot of research and then move forward on helping other women. So everything I do, like I said, is backed in science, and read lots of books like Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, Captivate by Vanessa Van Edwards. She does lots of people research on like how to help people perceive you in the way that you want. So those are a few of the books that I've read that have helped a lot, but there's lots more out there too on how to help you make the impact you intend, whether that is related to gender bias or not, because there are ways you can make an impact that managers are really looking for you to take the initiative that are helpful.
Yeah, Lean In does a whole they have a series that they do for workplaces where they go through a lot of the different biases that women face and how to combat them in the workplace. And we do a whole series on this in our marketing bootcamp Sky Accelerator. And it's really interesting. I mean, you touched on a couple of them, but one of the data points is that women often receive feedback in the workplace on their personal style where men don't. So personal style,
Mhm.
meaning if, too abrasive, too quiet, too nice, too, whatever on their personal style, where men are not receiving that feedback. Another big one that people face, I think, especially on Zoom, it's easy to get interrupted or it's easy to say something and have someone not mention it. But then, like what you said before, how someone else can say it, and then all of a sudden the idea becomes heard, whereas it was brushed off before.
Yes.
And they're all little things that I think are really easy not to notice at first, or you just like, even as a woman, you're like, okay, it probably didn't mean anything, right? Like they probably just didn't hear it when I said the idea the first time. And at my first job out of college, I remember we had like a group chat of all of the girls, and when we'd be in meetings and someone would speak over someone or someone would say an idea and it wouldn't get heard, we would always have each other's backs, and a nice way of being like, "Oh my gosh, Mike, that's such a great idea. I'm so glad you said that." Or Mike, that's such a great idea. I really liked it when Sarah mentioned, Sarah had just brought that up 5 minutes ago.
That's a
Uh,
great example of
or
helping support other women and
yes.
letting them be credited. Yes, I love that.
Yes. Or if someone interrupts another one of your fellow coworkers who's a female, you could say, John, thank you for sharing. I want to take it back to Emily. She was just finishing up a really awesome thought there. And so
Perfect.
I think that there's some really positive ways that we can help each other as women in the workplace to not have
Absolutely.
to be, abrasive or petty about it, but to be able to kind of bring the focus back on other women.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great examples.
All right. Let's go back. So you have this passion for gender bias specifically. And the other part of, I think, what makes you unique is the science of decision making. So can you explain a little bit to me about what the science of decision making is?
Oh, that's a good question. Would you say would you say your question is in relation to how managers make decisions or making decisions yourself about your career? So I can answer the question really well.
That's a good, well, let's do making decisions about yourself for your career.
Okay. Um, being aware of your own internal bias. That's really important. Asking questions about how you were raised. What did your parents tell you that has now become your internal voice? Um, I've had to overcome that multiple times. So I would say that that's the most important factor is understanding what your internal voice is telling you all the time. And we're so much more often critical of ourselves than we are of others. The things that we tell ourselves, we would never dream of telling another person because it's just so rude or inconsiderate or insensitive. So try and think about that when you're thinking about, how you're making a decision about how to approach another person in regards to a conflict. So how you're deciding to engage with that conflict. Um, the other thing would be how to approach a manager about a promotion. So one of the important factors in that would be making a business case. And that's really important from a psychological perspective and a business perspective. And making a business case means that you are providing data and research and evidence of we should make this decision because it will help the business in this way. That's the basis of a decision maker, how a decision maker will decide if you're given a promotion or not. So if you can start making arguments like that and practicing that on a daily basis, whether that's for a promotion or you think a project should go a different direction, or you want a different person on your team to help execute the project in a certain way. So if you can provide evidence on that type of thing, if you can do a lot of research or get information from the company on I should be paid this much, or I should be given this project because I have XYZ skills that will help the company move in ABC ways to meet X objective. So making arguments like that is a big part of helping decision makers easily be persuaded. Those are two things that I would want to share with early people in their early career. Those are things that they're frequently missing.
It's not necessarily, it's not, I think when we are new in our career, we go for a promotion. It's like, I've been working really hard. I deserve it. Or I need to make more money. It's expensive where I live, or I've been here for a year. Again, like back to this, like I deserve it. And that may be true in a sense, but that's not what the business, that's not what your manager cares about or the company cares about. They care about themselves at the end of the day. So it's how can we reframe that in, I deserve a promotion because I have helped the business make more money and I will continue to do that, or focusing on an ROI that your manager really cares about.
Yes, exactly. It's while that's your internal dialogue of, oh my gosh, inflation is so high right now, I need a raise. Or yeah, I worked really hard for this and I know I deserve this. You still have to make a business case for it. So you have to think about it from their perspective. So you're not being perceived as, sometimes women are perceived as selfish when they're, advocating for a promotion or a raise or something like that. Men and women should both make business cases for what it is they want. So if you can do that, then you're more likely to get what you want, because you're not just showing, you're using bias in your favor, and that you're showing that you're communal, because women are seen more positively if they're communal, saying that this is a benefit for the company. It's not just about me. So doing that thing is very essential in getting what you want in corporate America.
What is something that you see, a mistake that you see women consistently make, as they, that's preventing them from reaching one of their career goals? Or what is something that when you meet women and you help them on, you see a very drastic improvement in their success?
I would say speaking up. So often we're people pleasers, and we're taught that from childhood, that it's not about me, it's about helping everyone else. So if you can think about it from a different perspective of, um, I have these needs and I'm helping the company, then that's going to be very helpful if you change that mindset. And then if you want to get into a leadership position, you need to be able to step back from being an individual contributor to being a delegator. And that can be very difficult sometimes. So it's important that you're able to start giving assignments instead of, having the mindset of what helped me succeed for these last 3 to 5 years was doing the work really well myself. So getting into a leadership position, you have to be able to move past that idea and then start seeing the strengths of your team and giving them assignments. So that's one thing that holds women back sometimes. And then I would say, when you are an individual contributor, there's a difference between being a contributor and being an impact player and truly making an impact on the organization. And this idea comes from Liz Weitzman's book, Impact Players. I suggest anyone who's an individual contributor read this book. It is so good. So an individual contributor is someone who does their job, whereas an impact player does the job that's needed. So you can ask the question like, okay, I'm just going through the motion. Like, am I just going through the motions, or am I really looking at what the problem is and then doing the job that's absolutely needed? Of course, within your scope of work, right? It needs to be within your scope of work. So you're not going outside the boundaries, and doing things that are outside of what's been given permission for you. But think about it more broadly than that. And then contributors wait for direction from their manager to just be told, like, this is what you're supposed to do next, and this is what you're supposed to do next. Whereas impact players step up to the plate and just do what needs to get done without constantly being told. And they also step back to let their other teammates shine as well. So it's not just about you. And then three more things about what individual contributors do. Contributors escalate issues to the managers saying that, hey, this is a problem, can you go fix it? Whereas an impact player finishes strong within the problem. So they recognize that there's a problem, there's an issue, and then they solve the problem. They don't just say to their manager, this is a problem. or like, this is a problem, can you fix it? They fix it themselves, or they collaborate with their manager to say, I have some ideas about how to solve this problem. I want to do that. What do you think? And then the last two are sticks to what they do and knows best. So if you are in your comfort zone and you're just doing what you know best, then you might be not making a big impact on your organization or your manager. Instead, ask good questions and then adjust what you need to do to make the impact instead of just staying in your comfort zone. And then the last one is, typically contributors add to the burden of their team, like they complain a lot or they don't do all of their assignments that they're supposed to, and an impact player makes work very light. So you have a sense of humor, you're able to, take some things off other people's plate without, doing their assignments, but you make it easier for your team to work with you. Whereas contributors just go through the motions, they make it more difficult for their team to work with them, etc. So if you can follow those 5 steps, then you're going to be better able to make an impact on your manager and make an impact on the organization to get promotions.
I love that. So striving to be an impact player rather than just an individual contributor. I
Mm-hmm.
definitely have to, the book's called Impact Player.
Yeah, Impact Players by Liz Wiseman.
Okay, I'm absolutely gonna have to check that out because I've not heard of that before, but I loved all of the pieces of advice that you've said, and those are little tidbits that I've had other podcast guests come on and maybe not say it as beautifully as you just did, but kind of touch on some of those things that you mentioned. So I think that is all incredible advice. As we wrap up here, Lori, is there anything else that you would like to say, or any advice that you have for young women pursuing their careers? And anything that they can do right now? I know you've honestly mentioned so many actionable little tidbits. So is there anything else that we didn't cover that you want to say?
Other little actual tidbits that I'd want to share. And I love specific tactics because it allows people to make instant changes. And one of those things that I would say is make sure that your head is in the top portion of your screen when you work remotely, because this makes you look taller and this helps people perceive you as more powerful. So if you can adjust where your camera is to where your chair is in your head, then people will see you as more powerful. And this is because of the bias from centuries and centuries of conditioning, where people have known that the big, strong people won all of our wars and kept us safe. So even though that has nothing to do with being successful in business, people still see a person who has a large body or who is tall as more capable and more competent. So if you can work on that, like just keep your head in the top portion of the screen if you work remotely or whenever you do, then people will see you as more competent, and they'll also be able to see your hands because your hands are able to be seen in the screen because your head's farther up. So that's just one little extra tidbit that you can adjust really quickly as well to be seen as more competent and powerful.
Yes, definitely. I think it's worth investing in what your Zoom setup looks like and really figuring
Absolutely.
out. Because I think when there was that transition initially from everyone going in office to everyone Zoom, there was a lot of like awkward camera angles, bad lighting.
So
But
often.
we've been in this for a while now. Like we're past the where you can have excuses of everything's chaotic around me. And I don't know what your thought on this too is, but I always prefer no background, like Zoom background versus Zoom background. Is there any science around that?
There is. So underneath all of our conversations is what's called proto conversation. And this is all of the subconscious questions that we're constantly asking in our interactions. So it can be things like, what did that facial expression really just say that their words didn't? What is a person really thinking of me? What is their body language saying? How am I being perceived? So if you can um, reduce the number of questions that other people are asking with interactions with you, they're going to feel less exhausted. And when you put a Zoom background on, it's another question that they're asking. It's what's really behind them? Was that a tree blowing in the wind? Did someone just walk past? Was that a pet? So if you can use a real background, even if it's just something like what I'm using right now, which is a room divider, then that helps because it decreases the exhaustion that a person feels subconsciously when they're interacting with you. So don't use a Zoom background. Don't use the fuzzy filter that blurs your background. Just get something that like invest in something that's really easy for you to use every time and really easy for you to adjust whenever you get on a Zoom call or a Microsoft Teams meeting. And if you can invest in those little things, then it's going to make a big difference. And make sure you have an ergonomic workstation wherever you work, because otherwise you're at over time, you're going to get back pain or leg pain or neck pain, something. Make sure that you have a ergonomic workstation, whether you work remotely or on site, because your health is so important. And if you don't have your health, you don't have much because you rely on that for everything. That's another thing that I would say for anyone in their undergrad or just going into corporate is prioritize your health, because when you don't have that, you don't have much. And I didn't for a long time. I I felt like, oh my gosh, everyone's going to judge me if I have to take time off. Or everyone will see that I'm really strong if I never use my paid time off. Like your paid time off is part of your compensation. Keep that in mind. Like if you can think about it as money, then you're more likely to use it. So take care of your health, take advantage of all that paid time off when you have it, and make sure that you're prioritizing who you are authentically and who you are, yeah, and prioritizing your health and like who you are at your core. Like, don't change who you are just to appease other people. Those would be my top two pieces of advice. Prioritize your health and don't try to be someone you're not, because you're going to be happier being who you are.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much, Lori. And thank you so much for sharing all of this incredible, actionable information during this episode. Where can our audience find you if they want to learn more about you?
LinkedIn, /n/LT Potts. So feel free to follow me on there for science-backed tips on career advancement for women and bias and discrimination and how you can overcome that.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast and talking all about like biases for women in the workplace. This was absolutely amazing. And I learned so much chatting with you, and I can't wait for our audience to listen.
Thank you, Natalie. It was a pleasure.